Hello everyone， 那在这堂课程开始之前，想跟大家说，我们会跟 Pressplay 合作，推出一个商务英语沟通全攻略的这个课程。那为什么我们想要推出这个课程呢？是因为发现在市面上其实有非常多理论的课程，还有很多公式的课程，但是在实际生活上面或者是高风险的情况之下，这些理论跟公式它都可能会失灵。那如何要利用我们的沟通能力来化险为夷，这就是我们这堂课程的一个非常大的重点。那这堂课程呢，大概会有8个多小时，5大章节，40个小节，也会有功课，还有各式各样的模板。但是因为在录制这堂课程之前，我们需要您的帮忙，也就是帮我们填写这个问卷。这个问卷只要花您3分钟的时间，那你填写之后呢，也会得到 Jeff Bezos 写作技巧的这个 PDF 档案。所以非常感谢大家能够提供你宝贵的时间。So thank you guys so much. 这个问卷连结就在我们 show notes 下面。So go ahead, click on the link and share it with other people as well. So thank you. 我们今天要来分享对于小心谨慎的分析家，我们应该要怎么样跟他们有效的沟通呢？Hello， 欢迎来到 Executive Plus 主管英语沟通力的 Podcast。I'm Sherry, an educator, certified coach, and style enthusiast. 我相信专业有效的沟通是语言跟逻辑的完美结合。
And I'm Nick, a startup consultant, corporate trainer, and late-night gaming junkie. I believe great communication requires the right mindset and solid frameworks.
我们希望带给大家职场英语的技能、跨文化沟通技巧与其他能帮助您成为出色领导者的工具。
Join us each week as we share our experience, research, and methodologies to take your communication and language skills from good to great. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Executive Plus podcast. And welcome to part 2 on our discussion of communication styles and versatility. If you need an overview or a context of what we're going to cover today, be sure to have checked out part 1, episode 226. In this episode, we want to dive deeper on that first communication style, analytical.
Analytical 也就是分析型的人，他们非常的讲求逻辑，比较一本正经，然后非常小心谨慎的人。那我们今天就要来讲，如果你今天是要对分析型的人做简报啊，或者是甚至跟他做 small talk, how do you actually do it?
So as a reminder, where does the analytical style come from? An analytical style is someone who is low on assertiveness, they are more ask-oriented, and low on responsiveness. They are more controlled in their emotions. Analyticals are people who pride themselves on the logic and structure of their thinking and are very, very good at gathering large amounts of information and processing it. What makes analyticals good communicators or good leaders are, if given enough time, and that's a really important piece, if given enough time, they are excellent decision makers. They will actually make the most high quality decisions of all the other styles.
也就是给他们足够的时间，他们绝对可以做个非常好的一个决定 but enough time.
One important aspect of an analytical is that they thrive on getting more information, being thorough, understanding everything that's going around them. Now, as a style that is low on assertiveness, they're more ask-oriented, and there is no one more clearly ask-oriented than an analytical. Think around your office. Think about the people around you. How many of them, when you ask a question, the first thing they do back to you is ask you a clarifying question rather than respond?
So let's say I bump into someone who is analytical and it was on Monday and I wanted to ask them about how their weekend is, right? So I asked the question like, how was your weekend? 所以 analytical 的人是不是比较容易会问说 Do you mean Saturday or Sunday? They want the clarification, right?
And it may seem like, well, that's a pretty simple question to understand. But with an analytical, they'll start to get into the details of understanding what it is you really want. Another aspect back to this idea of observable behavior is their response is usually not that quick, meaning they're actually going to sit there and process it for a little bit longer. Their body movement may not be like, oh, let me tell you all about my weekend with like big arm waving or a lot of expression. They'll usually look at you not angrily or upset, but usually quite seriously, and then start to understand a little bit more about what you mean.
Right， 所以他们其实是比较感觉上是比较严肃一点的人。当然，如果你跟表现型的人比起来，非常的严肃。那就算你可能在跟他们 chit chat 的时候，他们还是会很严肃的看着你，然后会寻求多一点的 clarification。就算你觉得你问他的问题非常的简单 ，like pick one, you can pick Saturday or Sunday.
Right, like you may be thinking, this is a very open-ended question. I'm happy to hear about anything that you did. I mean, like, how was my work over the weekend? Or, how was my free time over the weekend? Be like, all of the above. Any of these are an option.
So let's say we're going to have a company meeting and one of the attendants, or maybe some of our attendants, would be Analyticals. Now, how do I design the meeting in a way that I could incorporate them, like really have them to be part of the meeting? 因为我们在之前的 episode 有讲到，当在开会的时候，我们可能问他问题，他不会马上就说，因为他还在收集 information, they're gathering information. 所以我们如果在会议的时候，我们是希望有一些 engagement 的时候 ，what should we do to make them feel like they're part of the meeting?
To develop effective communication with an analytical, you need to keep two things in mind, which is one, it's not a great idea to apply pressure on analytical if you have not given them the time to gather or process information. So in the case of a lot of other styles, especially driver or expressive, who are very fast decision makers, drivers especially who want action plans as soon as possible, if you apply that same pressure upon an analytical, what you're creating is a very stressful situation for them. Now, that doesn't mean you can't ask them questions. It doesn't mean you can't give them deadlines. But it means that when you approach good communication with an analytical, you need to understand that you need to give as many details as possible. You need to give them time to process the information. But also, when you direct questions at them, you shouldn't direct very open-ended questions unless you are okay with having them ask clarifying questions.
OK， 所以对他们来讲，良好的沟通是你要给他们足够的时间，而且要足够的 detail information。所以如果我们在做 meeting 好 ，let's say we're hosting the meeting， 那我们会中有真的有蛮多 analytical 的话，我们是不是说在 let's say in the very beginning of the meeting, I would say, oh, we will be asking some question, or we will gather feedback from you guys at the end of the meeting. Do we do that announcement first so that they can be ready for that?
Yeah, prefacing things or giving people a heads up is usually something that helps an analytical. So this is back to you can ask them questions, you can push them for deadlines, but you need to give them some kind of warning. So if at the beginning of your meeting you'd be like, okay, we really need to make these decisions by the end of this meeting, but I want to give you some background or I want to give you some information first. This is where an analytical will thrive because they know they have enough time or they have a set period of time to gather information. If they have questions to ask, they will ask the questions and they have a sense of how to prepare. Whereas if you like pop quiz them, go, explain to me what's going on right now, that will create a lot of pressure.
Right.
And pressure is not bad, but what happens is the pressure doesn't mean they don't have a good answer. It doesn't mean they don't have a plan. But when they're under a lot of pressure, they may not be able to say it very clearly because they haven't had time to structure things in their mind.
Right.
Another thing to notice is, let's say in a group meeting situation, with an analytical, you can expect that if you ask a question to the group as a whole, this person is very unlikely to answer your question. If you want them to speak up during the meeting, you need to be able to direct questions at them, like directly, Sherry, could you tell us more about this thing? Then that person will answer, and they'll usually have a very good answer, but they are not going to speak up voluntarily in a open question to the whole group situation.
所以有的时候如果你讲does anyone wanted to provide any feedback 这个时候你绝对不会听到来自 Analytical 它的 feedback right 所以就要很具体的第一个你要 direct and also in the question it has to be very specific could you give us a feedback about this and you describe that situation
Right. With an analytical, that specificity will help them decide what they need to tell you. But also, in the situation where this is more about Q&A, that's how you get an answer. If this is about brainstorming, then you can ask them an open-ended question, but be prepared that their question back to you will be clarification. So if I'm like, can you tell us about the Q3 quarterly results? If you ask an analytical to do that, they will start to be like, do you want to know the revenue results? Do you want the profit margin results? Do you want an overall overview? And they'll start to pull down until they can specify which information should I be sharing with you. Or you will end up with like a 50-page report on your desk of every single piece of information from the quarter that you could think of.
So one thing that comes to mind is that when you're the host or when you're the presenter and you're getting a lot of questions from this audience, first of all, I think it's safe to say that you don't need to take that personally because I think a lot of times we feel like, oh my God, they're trying to ask me all these challenging questions. 他是不是在攻击我？但其实有的时候他们只是要更多的 information. They just wanted to have more clarification. They wanted to know all those information they're trying to gather, right?
You'll especially see this in terms of a high assertiveness, a driver or an expressive talking to an analytical.
Right.
Because expressive, let's look especially the complete opposite. So analytical is low assertiveness, low responsiveness, and expressive is high assertiveness, high responsiveness. So total opposites on this chart. And expressive will often get frustrated with an analytical because an expressive is very emotion, gut, intuition driven.
Right.
So they're like, let's do this. I'm excited about this. We're going to execute it on. It's going to be a great plan. And the first person who's just going to start asking questions like, okay, so what are our milestones? What are the deadlines? Who needs to be on the team? All of these things to an expressive will often feel like, why are you slowing us down? Why can't you just get excited? Why are you asking me these questions?
Right.
So this becomes an interesting dynamic. And back to good communication and something we talked about earlier, versatility. Understanding that. And for an expressive, not taking it personally, like, why?
Yeah.
Why are you trying to destroy my dreams?
对
But using it to your advantage. One thing that can make an analytical and an expressive best friends is that analyticals love to gather information and they're usually very good at recording all the information. So you'll see in analyticals that take a lot of notes. And it's mostly because when they're gathering information, they need somewhere to store it. Expressives don't take notes. They don't write things down. They just output a lot of information. So this can be a great relationship because expressives can talk, they can brainstorm, they can think, and an analytic will keep it all recorded. So that's where this can be a great synergy and someone you can be a great partner with. But in those other situations where expressives are just thinking out loud, this is everything we're going to do. We're going to make this project happen. Knowing that when an analytical asks you detailed questions, not to take it personally. They're not questioning you. They're actually trying to figure out how to do this the best way.
Yeah, 因为我就是 expressive, so 我会觉得有的时候 analytical 可能这些人他一直问我问题，我现在非常的激动 you know, I'm so motivated to do this. 我会觉得这些人在浇我冷水。Right? 所以就觉得说 it's kind of like dumping ice cold water on my face or something. They're like, why are you taking down my motivation? Like I am fired up right now, but you're just putting the fire away.
Yeah, cold water to the
Exactly.
face.
So 我觉得这个时候呢，刚刚 Nick 有讲得很好，就是说我们可以把Analytical 当成我们很好的伙伴，也就是当我们在讲话的时候，有时候可能讲噼里啪啦一大堆东西，但是 Analytical 的人他可以记下这些 detailed information. So that's a really good way to like play as a team, right? To collaborate with each other.
So when communicating with an analytical, something that you should keep in mind is that more detail is important to them. They will not accept just the key information. They will not accept just thinking out loud. They will continually try and get down to how detailed of information we can get. So let's look at communication with, say, your boss. If you notice that the way your boss operates is less likely to just give you direct instructions, they're more likely to ask you questions. If you submit a report, their first response is like, oh, I also want to know A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then how much detail. That's how they like information. Then these are things to keep in mind. If I want to talk to my boss and they're an analytical, anytime I report to them, I should assume that every detail is important, that they need to absorb this information in order to make a decision, and that if I want them to make a decision or I need them to take action on something I have submitted, I need to give them a buffer. If I ask them to make a decision in that meeting, like I submit the report and I'm like, okay, I need an answer right now. You're not going to get one and you're probably going to have a pretty frustrating relationship. But if you go, okay, I need this decision by next week. I'm going to give the report. I'm going to tell that person, like, I need to get back to our client by next week. If you have any questions about this, please ask me. I'm very happy to answer. But I need this by 5 days from now, 7 days from now.
所以如果今天你的老板是 analytical 的人的话，你一定要给他足够的时间 right? 给他 report 但是可能1个礼拜之前你要给他一个 specific timeline 也就是多少时间内你需要一个 answer 一个 feedback. So giving them enough time to really think about the decision. But here's my question though. When we do presentation, let's say, 那我们常常会说 presentation 我们都要有一刚开始要有一些 key takeaway 可以提供。那但是我们又知道 analytical 的人他是非常需要很多的 detail and information. So how do we plan or how do we design? 我这边讲 design 不是那个设计 like visual design. We're talking about planning. How do we plan a presentation that could be effective for analytical?
If the person you're presenting to is an analytical, step one, this one word, one slide is not acceptable.
So not the Apple way, right?
No, you cannot Apple them. It looks beautiful. An analytic will hate it. That doesn't mean that you need to have like really messy information condensed slides. 2 ways that you need to work with an analytical. One is you do need to have a good structure or logic to the information. But you need to be prepared that probably, let's say I have 20 minutes presentation. I have enough information to cover 20 minutes, but I better have a whole lot of other information in my presentation deck with like technical details, any kind of data or spreadsheets or information like timelines that when they ask me, I am ready to offer. So that's one thing you need to consider is in addition to your main presentation, your main ideas or the key takeaways, you need to have a whole lot of information so that when you get to Q&A. The other thing that you need to notice is if the key decision maker for your presentation is an analytical, they still may not talk a lot in the meeting itself. Maybe you're in a room and you have like the sales BD person plus the actual decision maker in the company. And the decision maker is an analytical. The salesperson's an expressive. The salesperson's going to ask you all the questions. They're going to engage with you through the presentation. But if you know the analytical is the decision maker, you need to find a way either after the meeting to like pull them aside, ask a few questions, have a conversation, give them a chance to talk, or a way to reach out to them one-on-one. If you don't have an opportunity to have a private conversation after, in the meeting, you should not front load a lot of questions on them. If you think the decision maker is analytical, you can ask them a few questions at the beginning, but let them process the information. And then at the end, very directed, specific questions to them rather than open-ended. And you will get a lot better engagement than you would if you just asked an open-ended question.
Okay, so to recap, 刚刚有讲过，如果我们今天要设计一个简报的话，那这个简报呢，我们就要把很多一些 data， 所有这些 detail information 放在我们的 Q&A 的部分。这个时候你就可以，当他们有很多问题的时候，你就可以 show 给他们看。那如果今天呢，我们时间有限，那决定权是在这 analytical 身上，但是也有其他成员参加。那或许在这个 meeting 当中，在这个简报当中 ，analytical 的人可能会没有时间去跟你等于说问他们所想的问题 so 你就必须要找另外的时间跟他们有机会坐下来 one-on-one give them the time to ask those questions
give them more of your attention and help them to get through their process. And analytical with enough time and enough heads up will make very high quality decisions, and they will be the one who is committed. Like, let's say I'm selling to a client. If I can sell to an analytical and they have processed everything I said, that's your champion in that company.
Yeah, 所以真的是如果你能够 persuade, 你能够说服 analytical 的话，这个人会跟你很久。
Well, we hope that you enjoyed this deep dive into the analytical mindset, our first style of the 4 social styles that we're going to share with you. Be sure to check out the show notes for a bit more information about how analyticals think and work and how to prepare to talk to them. We'll talk to you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.
The Executive Plus podcast is a Presentality Group production, produced and hosted by Sherry Fang and Nick Howard. You can search us on Facebook, 主管英文 Executive Plus. You can also find us on Instagram, Communication R&D, and email us at sherry@epstyleplus.com.